All righty, so we're going to go ahead and get started and introduce our panel of experts who will not only lead a fruitful inventory management discussion with us, but they'll also be answering some of your questions, workshopping some challenges with you. So first, I'm really pleased to introduce our panel. So we'll start with Vivian Kaye, who's the founder and CEO of KinkyCurlyYaki. Thank you so much for being here, Vivian. Do you mind just giving us one or two sentences about you and your business?
Yes, it's KinkyCurlyYaki is a premium textured hair extensions brand for Black women. I've been running it since 2012, multi-million-dollar business, and I'm a pretty dope lady.
That is a fact. That is a fact. Thank you. All right, next I'm excited to welcome Jacquelyn Rodgers, who's the founder and CEO of Greentop Gifts. So Jacquelyn, you mind telling us a little bit about you and Greentop?
Hi, I'm Jacquelyn Rodgers. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm founder and CEO of Greentop Gifts. We bring diversity to celebrations with unique gift wrap, home decor, and apparel. Our characters and creations are Clarence Claus, our Black Santa, and our celebration characters. And I enjoy managing a small business and wrestling with two kids.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. And next, I'll introduce Dana Donofree, who's the founder and CEO of Anaono. So, Dana, so glad that you are joining us. Could you share a little bit of your story and your business story?
Yeah, I'm Dana. I'm the founder and CEO of Anaono. We are boob inclusive lingerie that is seeking out to change the conversation of full equity and inclusion when it comes to an intimates department. So 2 boobs, 1 boob, no boobs or new boobs. We have you supported. And I'm very lucky. I've been a fashion designer my entire life, and I'm thrilled to get to do something I'm passionate and love every single day of my life. So thank you for having me here. And I'm excited to share my experience from Anaono to my entire fashion career. So stoked to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, I'm so glad to have Caroline Mack, who's a food entrepreneur and a program consultant with us today. So Caroline, thanks for coming. Can you introduce yourself for us, please?
Yeah, so my name is Caroline, and I have also been a food entrepreneur. Most recently, I was overseeing incubator programming for various commercial kitchens. My goal is to help emerging food brands and new business owners make less of the same mistakes that maybe I did and learn from each other, because our goal is to really build community and help each other out. So I'm really excited to be on this wonderful panel with all these fantastic ladies and other leaders in the field.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm really excited about the diversity of experience and expertise. I think between everybody in this group, we could answer almost any question. So I'm really grateful for you all joining us today. All right, let's dive into our first question. So we'll kind of start at the beginning when it comes to inventory management. So when you first started your business, how did you go about finding suppliers and sourcing inventory? So we'll start with Jacquelyn and then we'll go to Caroline for this question.
I started to find suppliers and manufacturers because I used Google. I didn't have a background in the category that I launched. And so, where some of the panelists have worked in the industry for many years and are experts, I love stationery. I loved gift wrap. I knew what I like to purchase as a consumer, but I knew nothing about how to manufacture it. So I looked and read lots of articles. I looked at YouTube videos, and I knew enough technical terms by the time I finished my research to call our manufacturers and suppliers and talk intelligently enough to them to get them to take a chance on helping us manufacture the products that we wanted. So really researching the industry is what was helped me to launch our business.
Awesome, thanks. And Caroline, what about your experience helping business owners kind of get into those first conversations?
Absolutely. And I'll speak from the point of view of food businesses. So I'll start with my own food business, which was called Brooklyn Soda Works. And my partner, I started it in 2010. And because we were very much focused on working with fresh food and local farmers, I took a slightly different approach, because Googling wasn't so much an option. Even back then, things seemed quite different. And this holds true for anyone who wants to, say, work in food manufacturing in any type of capacity. Go hit up your local farmers market, go talk to the people that you're buying from, especially if the integrity of the product is something that you are very concerned with. So that's how I got started. I would hit up the farmers markets and build relationships with local farmers, seasonal fruit. And then eventually, as we scaled, we were able to negotiate better rates with them. We were able to say maybe prepay for a certain number of pallets of things. And that's something that you should do at every stage of your manufacturing growth. Make sure that you're thinking about your projections and see if you can work with your trusted producer, your trusted sort of ingredient purveyor, to make sure that you're getting the best rate possible. I will say that, I want to acknowledge that, right? COVID has really thrown a wrench in a lot of sourcing. So what I'm saying now may not totally apply for folks who are starting in the food industry, but I do think that approach of hitting up your producers and making sure you're very clear about what your standards are and where you hope to be is really great. And then the other example I want to give, so, I know not everyone is working with local farmers. A lot of folks say buying ingredients from different parts of the country, different countries. There, it's really helpful if you can find a broker who's responsible, for example, to find vanilla beans, right? So vanilla is a very high priced product. The quality varied a lot, and we learned so much in the beginning about the variation in vanilla bean quality in the different countries it came from. And there, for us, finding a broker at our very early stages made a huge difference in negotiating good rates and also being able to get samples of products.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's a great lead in to our next question, kind of as the business grows, wondering how you've managed change around your inventory ordering as the business has grown, and maybe how you knew when it was time to increase the supply. So we'll start with this question for Dana, and then we'll go to Vivian.
I love this question because, you have to start somewhere. And I was literally entering into our next raise and was just looking at these numbers this morning and realizing that we've experienced over 10x growth in under 5 years. So planning inventory is quite the challenge in our environment. Sometimes you can't plan, right? Sometimes you can't plan for opportunity. My very first moment of press was in 2014 when the Today Show wrote an incredible article that ended up going viral. And I literally sold out of my entire collection overnight, which left me with the worst possible problem that any small business has: no inventory left to sell. And people will say, "Oh, this is so great. Congratulations." To any business owner, I think we say, this is the worst problem we could have in the world. And in doing so, I had just so happened had started another production line at my factory, of which case was followed up by a people.com article. And my whole new inventory that was coming in blew out, even though I did launch a pre-order on that inventory to the consumer in hopes that that was just going to stretch out the press opportunity to then now be in a total space again of zero to no inventory. So I say that because there is this unpredictability of what you're doing. So you have to leverage your own ability to risk. I'm in fashion. I happen to be in fashion basics, but if you are thinking about a seasonal type of business, right, you have to kind of plan forward by what is the risk and potential and opportunity that you have when you make a buy. So if you're going to buy at X number, what is your expectation of your sell-through of that number? If you buy 100 pieces, you should at least be projecting somewhere between a 75 and 85% sell-through within a certain amount of time, depending on how long it takes to make your product. Because then you've got a markdown season, right? And that markdown season starts to happen over time periodically, and you want to know how long are your markdowns going to stretch itself out. And the unfortunate side to this answer is you don't often know until you know. So don't feel bad that the beginning parts of your business is somewhat of the guesswork. And you're not always right. Maybe you underpredict and you have an incredible sales season and you hit a 95% sell-through. Again, a great opportunity. But if you're not backloaded on your next seasonal activity, then you're going to have a lull where you're not going to have product to sell. That means there's no additional cash coming into your business. If you predict too high, then what is your worst case scenario? If you predicted that 85% sell-through, but you only received a 50% sell-through, how long is that going to take you? How aggressive do your markdowns need to be? And how long is that dollar going to have to stretch itself out in your entire operating budget? So that's a lot of information to say, It's okay not to know, but these numbers do matter when you sit at the table to make your decisions. So come to the table with as much knowledge and information that you can in order to predict the future side of your business until you start to build your seasonal trends. Like, I know if we're growing 85% year over year in our direct to consumer, I have to bucket that out into what styles lead that charge, what sizes lead that charge, what colors lead that charge. And then I can predict my future based upon what I know from my past. But until you build that past, it's very hard because you are doing a lot of guesswork. And you just have to understand your risk and how far your dollar can or cannot stretch.
Thank you so much. Those are such excellent insights. Vivian, what about your experience with this growth moment?
Well, for me, it sort of snowballed. So I started my business in a bin like this. So you see this Rubbermaid bin? I have one at home, and it's pretty much the exact thing that I started my business with. A customer would buy 2. I would take that money and the profit and buy 4. And that's how I slowly grew my business. And then 3 years later, like I did it slowly. So 3 years later, I hit my first million. Now those 3 years were a hot mess because I was using big cartel at the time, and there was nothing really telling me what I needed to order. So it was a lot of guesswork, like Dana mentioned, like your first couple of years until you've got the cash to invest in into an app or a person who's going to help you figure out what you need to bring in, you're going to have to do a lot of guesswork. So my guesswork was, okay, so a lot of people seem to be ordering this particular product. So I'm going to order, I don't know, 5 more and see what happens. And then that kept happening to the point where it's like, okay, I need more than 5. Okay, 10. Ooh, okay. And it was I felt like it was a lot of risk involved because I wasn't prepared to make the huge investments because I didn't know what that was supposed to look like or even what this business was doing. Right. And so it's a lot of guesswork. You have to trust yourself. You will make mistakes. And you will, like, I remember 2 years ago, just before COVID hit, I had an overstock of just 2 SKUs, and it took me a year to sell through it. But my product's not seasonal, it's hair extensions. So it's not something that expires or goes out of style or anything like that. It's something that just, it can sit here on the shelf, but that's still capital that sits on your floor. So you have to be really mindful of the products of the investments that you're making. You have to really watch what you're actually selling. Don't be afraid to cut dead weight off. Right. So if you think, okay, yeah, you might really like this mug you're selling, but no one's buying it, girl, get rid of it. Don't sell it anymore. Mark it down and get rid of it. Don't order anymore. So you have to really be able to do the guesswork and not be afraid to make mistakes.
That is so true. And I think it's so important for everybody to realize that everybody else is also guessing. Like, you're not coming from behind if you're guessing. That's kind of part of the game.
Nobody knows what they're doing. Trust me.
That's awesome. Well, our next question, Vivian, I'll actually start with you for this question. I'm wondering if you can tell us, in that kind of change process, that snowball process, of a time when you needed to change suppliers or you needed to change where the inventory was coming from. And there's kind of multiple pieces with this. So how did you find the new supplier and then end the first relationship and then also maintain consistent inventory across that transition? So love to hear your thoughts, Vivian, and then we'll go to Dana for this.
Yeah, well, for me, it's not as easy to switch suppliers because of the product we sell, which is human textured hair extensions. So usually what happens, how I found my supplier was trying to solve my own problem. So I needed hair extensions that looked like my hair. So I did my own Q&A, but not because I wanted to start a business, but because I wanted to solve my own problem. So when I finally found someone who could solve my problem, I just sort of ran with that factory. Now, there were times where they couldn't keep up with the demand. So then I tried to, engage with other vendors. But with the type of product that I sell, again, a lot of my customers are returning customers. So they'll return once a year or, every 6 months or whatever the case may be. And they noticed. They were like, no, I don't want this. I want what you sent me last year. And so then it's been really tough to bring in new vendors. So, right now I've got 3 vendors and 2 of them I have been working with since 2012. And every single time I've tried to replace them, I get an influx of customers complaining that this isn't the same. And so it's like, okay, well, then, that's the way it goes. But that's the thing. So it really depends on the product that you're selling, and your customers. If you've got returning customers and they notice things, pay attention to that. Listen to the feedback. If they don't like it, guess what? They're going to tell all their friends they hate it. And that's not going to be good for business. Now, listen, if you've got 100 customers saying they like it and 2 say they don't, take it with a grain of salt. Everyone's not going to like everything, but really pay attention to that. And, to maintain consistent inventory, it's a risk, right? Like, and I'm sure every single brand has even the big brands go through this, where they try to replace a vendor and then boom, everyone complains that they hate it. And then that takes, it takes a hit on their brand and on their business. So pay attention to that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dana?
Oh, I agree with everything Vivian has shared. And I think, it's interesting when you're making products, you have to understand that the product supplying, sourcing, manufacturing world is never perfect. It wasn't perfect before COVID. And now with COVID, it has become even more complex. So changing suppliers can be because you outgrow a supplier. I mean, I've gone from making my product inside small factories in Hong Kong to moving them outside to Shenzhen, China, to pulling them into the United States, to transferring them into South America, all in the last 4 years. And, there's this reality to say that like the transition of all of those different locations on top of the suppliers and the materials that are accessible to each other at those locations have a very complex model that requires you to remain nimble. But like Vivian said, if you have loyal customers, if you're not looking for that one and done acquisition, your customers notice. And it's very interesting what they notice. It could be the quality of the garment. It could be, or the quality of the product. It could be the way it fits or the way it touches or the way it feels. And that onus is on you. And if you're a solo founder, if you're a small company, if you have a product development team, keeping that consistent as much as you possibly can is a key to your success. Because just give a very real life example. COVID has caused tons of problems throughout the supply chain, as many, many people know. And it wasn't that I had changed my suppliers, but my suppliers were so limited in their capacity and their accessibility that they had to create outsourced factory operations in order to meet the demand and the supply that I was requiring from them. So it wasn't until my customer called and complained about the fit of one of my garments that I was even able to know that my factory had ever outsourced my goods. And this is quite a common practice, especially in apparel, but there is this realization that if they were just trying to meet my demand, they were doing everything that they could to not miss my ship date. That was a feasible and respectable thing to do at the time, but their eyes weren't on that supplier. And since I wasn't alerted, I wasn't double checking either. And, this is then trickle down effects. So there's problems that will relate to like your day to day. But if you're really looking to say, okay, maybe I was in a small supplier and now I need a larger supplier because my volume has outpaced this smaller supplier, give yourself double the amount of time that your supplier tells you that they need. Because they could tell you, we'll be done in 3 months. We'll be ready to ship. We'll be ready to take your order. I will tell you right now, it is a lie. So just take it and double it, because if you don't have that buffer in your own schedule and you stop your orders from your current supplier because they told you 3 months and you don't have 3 months of inventory, it's just that same problem I expressed earlier. You have no product to sell. So even if there is a slight overlap, account for it, because know that the world is not perfect and the supply chain is not perfect and manufacturing is not perfect. So always put a buffer in at least 4 to 6 weeks of anything a factory ever tells you ever. So that is my advice in the supply chain.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's such a good point. Like just anything you can do to hedge a little bit of the risk, I think is probably a smart move. All right. So next I want to turn, given the time of year, to a question about seasonality. And Jacquelyn, you are the seasonality expert. I mean, your set of products is just perfect for this. So would love to hear your thoughts about preparing for seasonal demand and maybe how far in advance you change your inventory volumes or change any of your processes to kind of anticipate some of that big seasonal boom?
Yeah, when we first launched the business, first, I'm not an expert. I'm still learning, right? We all say we still learning, right? But as far as for seasonality, I definitely have some experience with that. When we first launched our business, we had 2 SKUs. We managed the inventory in the garage of our house, and now we've expanded to a warehouse with over 76 SKUs, and we're doing more than just Christmas product. But with Christmas product, we're prepping now for Christmas of 2022. So talking to retailers are looking at their calendars and planning for the next season for Christmas before Christmas even gets here this year. So there's a large lead time, especially when you're working with manufacturers outside of the US. You don't get a second ship window. You have to order it that first time, and you hope that your forecast is accurate and that you have enough to anticipate, your customer needs. And then if there is a press or a bump, that you can account for that as well. So there's some guesswork to it. I feel like we have a better handle on it now than we've had in the past. And even so with the pandemic, with COVID, there are containers that are sitting on the coast that we can't get product from. If you look in the retail stores, they're unable to get products. There's all kinds of things that you can't control, and there's things that you can control. So being mindful of just, the basic things you need to source. Pulp and paper have increased, which has caused us to have price increases. Things like thread have gone up, cotton. So all those things play a part when manufacturing and can affect your lead times and how you go about forecasting. And so you kind of have to have your ear to the ground and be aware of those things. Like, what are the ports looking like? What are supplies looking like? What is China looking like? Do they have enough electricity to keep the factories open for 5 days of the week? Those are all things that keep us up at night. But for certain, those are part of seasonality that with customers, sometimes we can reorder if it's something that's made in the US, and we can handle the freight and the logistics of getting a reorder. But for most of our for seasonal, it's done very far in advance, and it's a one-time order. And once it's done, because you don't want to have Christmas inventory that's sitting in your warehouse, that capital, as Vivian mentioned earlier, that sits for another year. No one wants that to collect us. You want it done and out as quick as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so our next question, I think, Jacquelyn, you spoke to it a little bit before here, but thinking about the production cycle, and there's, like you said, there's so many things about this that a business owner can't control and some things that they can. But we'd love to hear from you, Jacquelyn, first, and then we'll go to Dana on this on how long you think it took you, or maybe you're still in the process of getting a strong understanding of the production cycle and kind of the time that it takes to go from raw input all the way through to the delivery to the customer, or if that's kind of an evolving thing that you never really feel like you fully understand.
We learn from mistakes. Dana mentioned earlier about whatever the factory tells you, put a buffer in it. I think they'll tell us, oh, it'll be ready in 65 days or 40 days. Well, if it sits at the port in LA and it can't get off the container, and you think, oh, I'm gonna start this and launch it next week, and it sits for 2 more weeks in customs, or customs decides to hold your inventory until they want to tax. There are all kinds of crazy stuff. So you have to factor in that buffer of time, because those things you can't control, and making sure you understand what your current inventory is. Do I have enough to hold me over? Is there another product I can fit in place? So being, I would say, nimble and having other options and things you can sell and promote that you can keep on hand constantly if you're in one of those situations where your bread and butter inventory isn't available, so that you're not just sitting there, because no one wants to not have product to sell, especially when you get a large press, or if someone reaches out to you and there's a celebrity that's wearing it, but you don't have any in the warehouse to ship out. And so making sure you are aware of the lead times and communicating. I would say just constant communication. My phone pings at 3 a.m. and my husband's like, is someone from China messaging? I'm like, yes, and I have to wake up because they're awake right now. And I would like to go to sleep and ignore this message, but I can't. So over communicating, never taking anything for word, and having good communications with your manufacturers. I almost felt like I dated a manufacturer for 6 months before I even cut them a check. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a scam. I was anxious. I was worried about it. I asked them so many questions, and I would figure out how to ask the same question 3 different ways just to make sure they weren't, scamming me. And I was looking up the factory and constantly, is there somebody else I can talk to? I was neurotic, but that was me. But you have to be, these businesses are our babies. They're how we make a livelihood. So you can never be too cautious when working with manufacturers and deciding.
Yeah, I think all of that sounds completely appropriate and not neurotic. Like you got to get the questions in. you gotta understand if you're going to put your business on the line for it. Dana, anything to add on that?
Yeah, again, couldn't agree more with all of that, Jacquelyn. But I think, understanding your product development cycle is just as equally as important of understanding your production cycle. And that again feeds into if you are a seasonal business or you have a launch date or you have a big event or whatever that is, backing out those timelines and what's reasonable, what's worst case scenario, how long do you have to get started? Because in our case, in apparel, and for somebody, I've manufactured and sourced apparel around the entire globe. And on top of not only knowing what a product cycle development should look like, as well as a production cycle, every country is different. And every country has a culture that is uniquely like embedded into how they manufacture and how they develop. And trust me, I could go on a laundry list of if somebody's going to deliver early or if they're going to deliver late, if they're going to tell you it's 2 weeks and it's actually really 12 weeks. And it's just built into the system, and the system is old and inundated, and that's why. But, understanding that product development cycle is twofold. One, it's what are you creating? How are you creating it? And how strenuous is that creation? So we do bras. So I have to build in not one. I almost never assume that my factory is going to nail our fit on the first round. I assume they're going to at least take 2, and I will drop it if they don't hit it by the 3rd, because at that point I'm out of time and I've now lost my production lead time due to the lack of product development. And so these things happen too. There could be fallout in your development cycle in order to get your production cycle on track. And then with production, with COVID, I can't stress enough the amount of over communication that you need with your facilities. If they tell you there's a date and they're going to hit it, and that date has come and gone and they haven't heard from you, you haven't followed up and you haven't chased them down, they're not going to hit that date. So constantly having that communication. Are we on track for next week? Are we on track for later in the end of the week? Are we on track for tomorrow? Like, it is that amount of over communication if you want to stay on schedule, because likely you will not hear that they are late until they miss their date, especially if you aren't following up with them. They'll be like, oh, I hadn't heard from you for 3 weeks. So we slowed down. So there is just like this back and forth, this relationship building, this like communication that you can have with your suppliers and with your own team, and then making that, happen. And of course, it depends on what you are manufacturing, apparel from, once all of the raw materials are in place, like raw materials can take 4 weeks, raw materials can take 12 weeks. Manufacturing can take 60 days, manufacturing can take 120 days. So, all of these are like playing with the calendar and backing things out, but, understanding really every truly step of that, every step of that phase, because I will scream when my factory tells me we're late because we didn't get the interior labels. Like, interior labels should take 7 to 14 days to make in general. But guess what? In COVID, they're taking 30 or 60 days. So since it was always a habit for the factory to place that raw material last, we now miss an entire delivery because they don't have the simplest trim inside the entire garment. So these things happen, and they're totally avoidable, but they're only avoidable if you keep the communication lines open and you're their babysitter.
Thank you so much. Those specific examples from both of you are so helpful. Appreciate it.
Another thing too, I want to mention,
Yeah.
knowing the holidays in the country you manufacture. I can tell you the holidays in China more than I can tell you when the holidays are in the US, okay? Knowing those holidays, because when they shut down, and it can impact your entire distribution.
And how they celebrate. You're 100% right. The Chinese New Year, I mean, I'm in South America, so it's like Christmas hits and everybody parties for 3 weeks, and the workers just never come back. And so you've got to be prepared for that. The holiday might be a week, but the actual extent to what it does to a factory could be 3 or 4 weeks.
Right. That's a great point. All right. So now I want to turn to a little bit of a different question that I know will probably affect a lot of the folks who are joining us based on where they said they were. We've got a lot of folks in urban areas in Atlanta and New York and LA and Detroit, in Chicago. And I think inventory storage can be a challenge no matter where you are, but especially for urban business owners where there's not a lot of space, or for a business owner who has a specialty product that might need a specific type of storage. So would love to hear about some problem solving strategies or kind of creative ways to address an inventory storage challenge. So first we'll go to Caroline on this because I know you have so much experience with this, and then we'll go to Vivian as well.
Yeah, this is a really interesting problem to have, especially for folks who are in like very dense cities, and especially if you're in the earlier stage of starting off. So let's say you're still manufacturing everything yourself, either in a shared facility or own small facility. You are likely looking at every single corner of your production facility, and it is stacked to the ceiling with cardboard, with jars, with your own raw ingredients. And when you get to the holidays, even more so. And then, you don't have your own warehouse. So what do you do? The one thing I would suggest, and this is something that earlier stage entrepreneurs, food entrepreneurs tend to forget to do, is you will likely have to rent out additional seasonal storage, whether that's like additional cold, frozen, or dry storage. That's likely something you're going to have to do. And that's an option for very many people. But you cannot forget you've got to make sure that you take into account this additional storage fee, which, especially if you're in the New York area, can really rack up. That has to be built into your pricing model. So that's something I really try to like impart on folks. Extra walk-in cooler space is also something that's particularly pricey. So let's say you are in a something that does require to be temperature controlled. Let's say it's a specialty cake, or it's a special type of like cheese or chocolate that has to be stored at a specific temperature. If you are researching now for the holiday season, it is likely too late. So again, I can't really emphasizes enough. If it is summer, you got to be thinking about, you should already be done planning for your storage for your holiday season. So again, if you don't have that option of, say, this is your first holiday season, there are a couple of ways that you can maybe be flexible. Find out who else is maybe on an opposite season from you. Maybe there's an ice cream store that this is their slowest season. Figure out what you can do to work with your fellow community of, say, food entrepreneurs or specialty food entrepreneurs. Not everyone, majority of food, your busy season is now, but maybe there's someone who is on an opposite season, and try to work with them. Get really creative. And again, because there are options in, like, say, the tri-state area for renting out cold storage, dry storage, frozen storage, whatever will have you. These are places that your distributor is going to be familiar with picking up from. So make a relationship with those cold storage facilities, go check them out, make sure they are inspected and food safe, because not every single place is. And then, of course, as you graduate on to, say, working with a co-packer or working with like 3PL, these are all real options that you can do. However, the quality of all these warehousing solutions and distribution points, they do vary a lot. So do your research and make sure that you're talking to your fellow community of food makers.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Vivian, what about you? What's your storage experience or any advice with storing inventory?
Well, again, started from the bottom, now we're here. And here is a 1,000 square foot warehouse where this is my office, and then out there is where all the hair lives. But even with that, I started it in a bin like this, and then moved to a shelving, and that was in my apartment, and then moved it to my parents' basement. And then from my parents' basement, bought my own house, renovated my basement, and that's where it lived. And then from there, I moved it here, and I've been here for the past 4 years now. And it's ever changing. If you're just starting out, you don't need fancy shelving. Honestly, you could go to IKEA or Uline and just get, or even like bins like that. You could just get bins like that, or even cheaper, get boxes and then cut a little hole, a little U-shaped hole, so that your inventory can sit in it. And that's your inventory storage. Like, all my bins, even though I'm a multi-million-dollar company, come from the dollar store. You line shelves with dollar store bins to hold millions of dollars worth of inventory. So, my advice is to start where you are with what you have. And you will eventually get bigger. You don't got to go big or go home when you're just starting out. So if you're at home, maybe carve out a little corner of your garage, your basement, your dining room, whatever it is, in order to keep your inventory organized, because it's really what helps you to build efficient systems for your business. If your inventory is organized, right? If you know what you have, how many you have, and how many you have, what you have, and how to pack it, I guess, or ship it, right? So keep it simple. Start with what you have, with what you got, and do what you can until you can do more.
Those are great tactics. And I love the idea of the dollar store. If it holds it, it doesn't matter how much it costs. It holds it for $1, it holds it for $20. Why spend 20 when you can just spend one, That's great. All right. Thank you all so much. This has been such a fruitful conversation. I want to thank each of you for your insights.